Hey everybody, welcome back to The Engineered Angler. My name is Franco. I'm a professional engineer, a lure maker, and lure designer. And I make these videos to share some of the tips and techniques that I've learned and come up with over the years, and to put a little bit of physics and engineering into the art of lure making. And today, we're gonna make a lure I lost, and I hate to admit it, like 30 years ago. Problem is, I don't have a photograph of this lure. I don't have the manufacturer, the model. I don't have anything on this lure but a vague memory of what it looked like. It was a topwater lure, about 2.5, maybe 2 3/4 inches long. I lost this thing at a time when I was really getting into bass fishing. I had moved away from Miami to Daytona, Florida, so I couldn't do a whole lot of saltwater fishing, and I was gearing up and buying lures for bass fishing. And this one little lure caught my eye in the store. I started using it and it was killing. Every time I threw that thing, it got bit. And then one day I lost it. I don't even remember how I lost it or where it was that I lost it. And I immediately went out looking for another one. I never could find it. And over the years, every time I go into a small town, I'll go to a little local tackle shop to see if they have any old lures laying around.
I've even spent hours scrolling through Google images of vintage and collectible lures. I've combed through photographs of people's tackle boxes. I've searched through dozens of photographs of lure collections trying to find this lure.
But I've never been able to find another lure like it. So we're gonna have to make this lure strictly from a 30-year-old memory of a lure that I only had for like a season and a half. So as you watch this video and you hear the description of it and you see the drawings of it and you recognize this lure, please be sure to let me know what you think it is in the description. Maybe with everybody out there, I'll actually find out what it was. So just going by my vague memory, the lure had kind of a narrow body, kind of a rounded top, a bit of a flat spot here at the nose, and then the belly was pretty much just flat all the way across, maybe coming up a little bit as it approached the head. Maybe this flat spot wasn't so big, but we're going to go with that for now. The tine-eye was definitely below the center line. And this lure's sort of gimmick was that it had little tiny kind of gills cut into it. A series of about 4 of them on each side. And the idea was that as you pulled it across the water, the gills would make bubbles. Now, did it actually make bubbles? Maybe. I don't really remember. But it caught fish. So those little gill plates were sort of otherwise, there was really nothing special about the lure. There were no knockers in it, no rattles, and it just floated nice and horizontal in the water. I'm going to go with 2 3/4 inches for length and 5/8 inch for the biggest diameter on the lure, which occurs just in front of the halfway point, if memory serves. And I'm going to go ahead and make it from a dowel, because starting off with a round shape is just going to make things go faster. This is a 3/4 inch dowel, so I'll be taking a 1/16 of an inch off all around anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and measure and cut this. So before we start shaping this thing, I need some guidelines. So the first thing I'm going to do is just put a horizontal line on this to mark the bottom of the lure. And I'll have to put another mark 180 degrees on the other side to mark the top. So here's a quick trick to do that. Just take some masking tape and wrap it around it anywhere. And then with a sharp knife, just cut across that masking tape. Take it off, stick it down onto a ruler, mark the exact center, cut it at that mark. Then take one of the halves, line it up with your original line, and then that edge is the mark directly opposite of the other mark. And now I can use these 2 marks as my top and bottom of the lure, and that'll help me keep my shape nice and symmetric.
To be able to shape the taper both in the front and in the tail, I'll draw in these circles to give me guidelines so I can carve down to them. The nose end is marked low but in the center. For the tail, I want the circle centered, and I'll be using a much smaller circle because it'll taper down to a much finer end.
And as usual on this stuff, the precision doesn't really come from my measurements. It comes from how precise I am carving. So I don't go crazy trying to get it absolutely perfect, because there's so much that gets sort of interpreted as you're hand carving or sort of milling it down with sandpaper. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lay it flat on that bottom line and get a good flat spot on this thing. carving up the back a little easier, I'm going to take a bunch of material off with a knife, trying to get close to that center circle. This way I'll refine the shape the rest of the way with the sander. Most dowels are made of poplar, and it's a hard enough wood that it can be shaped into dowels and have some strength, but not so hard that you can't actually work with it. Now I'm just going around, cutting back, trying to get to that inner circle, and since I know this is my top, I'll be working a little farther back on the top than I will on the sides and bottom, and getting closer to the end as I rotate it around to the bottom. All right, I think that's got us close enough. Let's go back out to the sander. All right, we got it pretty close on the back, and the front is a little wonky, but that's because this circle isn't really my true target. I need to go ahead and create a flat spot here that's on a pretty steep angle, maybe 45, maybe a little less than 45. All right, that's closer to the finished product. I still got a little bit of hand sanding to do to get this thing a little more refined. It looks a bit rough, so we'll be doing some hand sanding, and I'll get back to you when we're ready to cut the little gills in. That's a pretty good shape there. It's pretty smoothed out. I've got some nice symmetry here, but before I put in where I want those little gill slots, I want to place the eyes so I can use those as sort of a reference. And I'm going to place them kind of high and kind of forward. They're not going to be very big. So the first mark for an eye is the easiest, right? Because you just put that where you think it ought to go. And then the second mark is the one you got to line up. So what I like to do is just sort of line it up on the top, don't move it, and then rotate around and line up and down, and do that a couple times. And then when I got it where I want it, I'll just mark the spot with something sharp, and then I can just drill out the socket. Gill slot. So I've got the first little gill slot drawn, and I just carry it over to the other side. And now that I pretty much know what the shape is going to be and the distance it takes up, I can go ahead and just distribute these things across the body. And you know, I think I'm just going to go with 3. I think 4 is going to be just a bit much for this lure. All right, let's go ahead and carve these little slots out. Shouldn't be much to it. I'm just going to do a vertical cut into the wood and then just take a little sliver off. Try not to get too sloppy here. And then slowly work to that vertical cut, creating a little bit of a flat spot back here. Alright, so that's kind of the roughed in carving. And as I'm doing this, if you guys recognize this lure somehow from the past, do me a favor, get down into the comments and tell me what this is. Alright, I've gone ahead and marked where I want the tie-on eye, the belly hook eye, and the tail hook eye. And while I usually use my own twisted wire eyes, I'm going to use these factory made ones because I think they'll look more like the original. Now these little threaded eyes usually hold in pretty good, but I like to add just a drop of crazy glue before I screw it in. And of course I wipe off any excess, and I'll do that for the remaining 2. Alright, that looks pretty good. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and seal the lure, and all I'm going to do is give it a couple of coats of the polyacrylic. I just want it sealed enough so it won't absorb any water, because I do want to do a little bit of tank testing before I decide how much weight and where to put it, which is really the critical part, is where to put that weight. Now this is the stuff I usually use to seal the paint before I put the clear coat on it, but it also works pretty good as a wood sealer. Alright, that's about 3 coats, 3.5 coats I think. It already has a little bit of a sheen. This is also a good way to do a sanding seal. This stuff actually does stand up the fibers a little bit, and after this we'll give it a little sanding. But first let's see how well it beads water. Alright, I think that's pretty good. We can actually test it in the tank now. So it's time to decide how we're going to actually weight this thing. Now, on topwater lures, you don't have to add weight on all of them. Typically, what you want to do is add weight to create the action. or to create the attitude of the lure in the water. Some people like topwater lure that sits tail down, but other of us, like me, like a lure that is nice and horizontal on the water, especially if it's meant more to glide, or like this one, just to be pulled gently straight ahead. This is not really a walk the dog lure. So typically a walk the dog lure, you want it tail heavy. And as you want a lure that pulls straighter and straighter, you want to bring your weight forward, as long as you don't dip the nose, because that's going to want to make the nose kind of dunk under the water, and you don't want that. So with this little lure, obviously I just want it to pull forward and make those little bubbles, supposedly, with the gill slot. And in the past I've shown at least 2, maybe 3 different techniques for finding the center of buoyancy and the center of balance, which typically is the same thing once you have all the weights in, and finding where to add weight to keep that lure at the right attitude. Of course, you've got to keep in mind that you don't want to sink the lure. The lure should be nice and high floating. And on small lures, like this one, you typically don't want to add much weight at all. And sometimes I don't add any weight at all to a topwater this small. I just rely on the belly hook as my ballast to keep it from rolling too much. All right, let's put hooks on this and drop it in the tank and see what it looks like. All right, I'm just going to take the hooks and hang them on the hook hangers for now. Let's see how it floats. So it floats just fine the way it is. I don't really feel the need to add any additional weight because I really want it to pull and kind of keep those gill slots kind of available to the surface of the water. So I'm not going to add anything. So I'm going to go ahead and just sand this smooth, because the next step after that is just painting, which is going to be a really simple paint job. I'm just going to go ahead and mimic the paint job that lure originally had. So back to the sandpaper. So the original lure was all black, and the only thing other than black it had was the inside of these gill slots painted white. So I'm going to make a little template out of this foil tape, and I'm just going to press it on there so it marks out the shape of the gill plate, and then I'll just cut it out and use this. Cut out the little hole, and this way when I'm ready to paint, I can just protect the rest of the lure and paint that gill slot white. Okay, before we paint, I'm going to go ahead and just wipe this down with some denatured alcohol, get all my handprints off of it, any oils, pick up some dust, and we're going to go with opaque black. This is Tester's Aztec. I love paints that come ready to airbrush right out of the bottle. Blow the dust off first, just in case there's any left. All right, that's pretty good on the first coat. I'm going to let it dry for a few minutes and give it a second coat. All right, that looks good. Nice even black. Now we'll let that dry a little bit and move on to the white. And because I can never leave well enough alone, I want to put a little bit of a halo around the eye. Alright, that looks kind of cool. Let's put a little bit of red right here. And we'll stick to the Tester's old school paint. And that only takes a couple of drops. Alright, that looks old school big time. Let's get some eyes. What do you think? Silver with a red pupil? Or this frog green with the black pupil? Wait a minute, how about this bloodshot orange looking thing? Oh man, I like that. Let's go with the orange. Oh yeah, that looks cool. Time to give it another couple of coats of polyacrylic to seal the paint. I'll have to let it dry for about an hour in my little oven, and then we can go ahead and clear coat this thing. Set that for an hour. And as we wait, it's a great time for the question of the week. So this is where I answer questions from subscribers. And mostly they come from the comments. Some of you email me directly or message me on Instagram. Either way, I find the ones that are really common and worthwhile answering in long form in a video. In this case, the viewer asked me that he knew that I did a lot of work finding the density of wood for making the lures. And he probably had seen me do it a half a dozen to a dozen times on videos where I'll take a little sample of the wood itself. This one is camphor. Here's a little piece of cherry. I even have teak and maple and on and on. And what I do with these pieces is I measure the dimensions and I calculate the volume by multiplying the 3 dimensions of the piece. And then I take that volume and divide it into the weight. So I'll weigh them on a gram scale, and after I make that division, I have the density of the wood. In this case, it's 0.7 grams per milliliter. And it can change pretty radically depending on the wood. This one's 0.563, so it's substantially different. But the viewer wants to know how I go about figuring out the density of cured casting resin, so that when you've cast a lure like this one, you can know its volume. And probably a little more useful if you have a brand new mold and you're not quite sure how much of this stuff to mix. If you know the density of the cured resin and you know the volume of the lure that you've already carved, which is pretty simple to find, then it's real simple to calculate the amount of resin to use on your first casting with almost zero waste. And the simplest way to find that density is to take a little volumetric cup like this, and you can buy these things super cheap online, and they come in real handy because you can use them for mixing later. But they're graduated with milliliters, and you simply mix your resin in here exactly the way you plan to mix it for when you actually cast your lure, including any micro balloons you plan to put in it. And once the resin is cured inside the cup, it's real easy to pop it out. And what I like to do is sand down this edge so I have a nice clean edge to look at. I put it back in the cup and then I can read the volume directly from the cup. In this case, it's exactly 10 milliliters. So since I have the volume, all I have to do is weigh it. And this one is 6.5 grams. 6.5 divided by 10 is 0.65 grams per milliliter. So that's my density. So if my lure is 20 milliliters of volume, I just multiply that volume times the density of the mix, so that's 20 times 0.65, and I get 13 grams. So I need to mix a total of 13 grams of my resin mix to be sure that my mold will be completely full. So I hope that answers the question, and I hope you guys can see the value in doing that. I've done it for every mix that I've ever come up with. I needed to know that density so I could work out all my other volumetric needs and not end up wasting a bunch by experimenting on how much to mix. All right, keep those questions coming. I'll answer as many as I can online, and then the more complex ones end up on videos. All right, time to do the clear coat. All right, so what I typically do is let this thing spin for probably about 5 minutes. That gives the resin time to really sort of self-level and get all the bubbles out. And then I'll turn the lights on and give it another 3 hours, which is probably 2 hours too many, but I'd rather have it be overset than underset. Either way, it's already dark out, it's nighttime, and we'll have to wait for tomorrow to get this thing out on the lake. I'm gonna take the kayak out this time and see if we can't stir up some topwater action. All right, well, I'm not out here as early as I wanted to be, but this will have to do. I'm gonna head over to the shaded part of the lake. It's definitely a longer paddle than it looks like on the camera, I promise you. Let's try fishing in front of my neighbor's dock. There you go, first cast. Oh, he got off. First cast. That's crazy. What does that mean? Does that mean I won't catch anything else the rest of the day? Man, I'm so out of practice fishing at a kayak. I couldn't set that hook. It just kind of surprised me.
Can't see what I'm doing. I'll have to fish by braille. Got this thing on the other side of the dock. Yeah, it walks the dog. Alright, let's go around the that grass point over there. We'll try that and then we'll go into the shade. Oh, something exploded on it, but it must have been a little one. Gonna be a beautiful day at least. Here's another little protected cove. Unfortunately, the sun is a little too high to give us some shade here. Alright, we're gonna work some real nooks and crannies here. There's a little creek that runs in here. Actually, it's like a canal. Let's see if we can paddle into it and find some open water. This used to be wide open here. Alright, I don't see any open water. I think this is gonna have to be it for today. The wind's picking up and our luck has run out. I don't know, maybe hooking up on a fish on the first cast really is bad luck. I'm calling it here. Thanks to everybody who watched all the way through. I'm gonna put a short slideshow of the lure at the very end here. Don't forget to leave me a like if you like this content. Subscribe if you haven't, it's free. And share all this stuff with your friends. Don't forget, if you recognize this lure, let me know what it is. I'll see you guys next Friday.